Hold on, because what just looked like a tiny website update may have exploded into the biggest royal bombshell yet, shaking the monarchy's future from the inside out. What King Charles III has quietly put in motion has reportedly left Prince Harry completely stunned. Meghan Markle is now feeling the pressure, while royal watchers everywhere keep obsessing over one question that refuses to disappear. Who is really calling the shots behind palace doors and controlling the monarchy's final narrative?
It's this trip in 2 words: desperation and failure. Desperation and failure. Yikes and double yikes. Desperation and failure, my goodness.
Charles is not the pushover that the press seems to think he is and that they're trying to present him as being. He has not been taking his son's calls for some time now.
William is known to hold a grudge, and more than that, he cannot forgive his brother for what Harry has put his family through.
Harry was always, shall we say, the one that was difficult, always wanting to mess around, an attention seeker, many might say.
Meghan is someone who's desperate for fame. She's desperate for recognition. She's desperate for money, of course, and status. Now, isn't that?
I believe we are looking at a deeply corrupt establishment institution working with Harry and the palace to rehabilitate Harry's image and bring him back.
Well, failure because there is no money. The end. There is no money. Harry and Meghan are making no money.
Diana's philanthropic legacy is not there to act as a PR angle for Prince Harry.
We're seeing them effectively crawl on bended knee back to Britain, and they are to be pathetically grateful if the king agrees. Just let that sink.
Wait, seriously? For years, one stubborn question lurked like a shadow everyone noticed, but nobody dared confront. Why were they still listed there? Why did the institution behave like nothing ever changed after everything spoken, published, and televised before the entire world? Then, without warning, the silence completely shattered. Because what just unfolded behind those palace doors is being portrayed not as a routine revision, but as a carefully crafted statement. A boundary delivered through silence so thunderous it ripples across continents. And right at the center stands King Charles III, a man carefully balancing monarchy with legacy, now caught inside a storm insiders insist has shifted from patience into quiet finality. For years, another lingering question stalked every royal discussion like an unwelcome ghost nobody escaped. Why were they still displayed there? Why did the institution continue pretending absolutely nothing changed after everything exposed, printed, and broadcast before the world? Suddenly, the silence finally exploded. Because what unfolded behind palace walls is being presented not as some ordinary revision, but as an intentional message. A line established through silence, so overwhelming it reverberates across continents. Standing squarely at the heart of everything, King Charles III, a man cautiously balancing both monarchy and legacy, is now being dragged into a storm insiders argue has shifted from patience toward quiet finality.
My dears, I have long said the establishment are still protecting Prince Harry. At this point, I would argue, did he?
Every accusation, every explosive interview, every documentary scene stacked another brick onto the growing wall separating the Sussex story from the royal institution. Claims that rattled public confidence, a book exposing private family secrets, televised revelations spreading across every corner of the world, and still the single most controversial
Harry to make hay while the sun shines and take advantage. And if he sees Harry, and if he sees the children, it's my understanding is it's going to be in very limited, constricted.
The timing of what unfolded next is exactly what transformed a quiet website adjustment into a worldwide royal talking point. Because according to insiders, this was never accidental. It was intentional. It matched far too closely with upcoming appearances, scheduled visits, and the changing internal dynamics among senior royals. And what makes everything even more dramatic is the growing claim that Prince William and King Charles III were not standing on opposite sides this time, but were instead completely united.
And this is the bit of fighting between William and His Majesty the King is, will they cross?
And if that reported unity is real, then it completely flips everything people believed they understood about the royal power structure. Because this was never just about an online page. It was about symbolism, legitimacy, and the invisible thread that quietly ties public identity to institutional approval, making this move feel far bigger than anyone first imagined.
That you have to have respect for this institution and you can't exploit it. I mean, you're not a whore in a convent setting yourself up as the chief madam. This is a convent and it's supposed to be pure.
And this is exactly where the story takes an even sharper turn, because Meghan Markle's entire post-royal image has long been judged through the battle between branding and genuine belonging. Critics argue that without the royal connection, everything changes. The prestige fades, the public response shifts, and doors either open under completely different circumstances or never open again. That is precisely why even the smallest public change to how that royal connection is presented suddenly becomes something much bigger than a routine website update.
Flower sprinkles. Flower sprinkles, my husband. And the spread, the disgusting, horrible, runny spread. If you opened it right, it's been sitting in a warehouse for so long. I've got no doubt.
Because in this royal saga, timing is never simply about timing. It instantly becomes interpretation, and interpretation quickly turns into pure fuel for speculation. Especially when everything happens just before planned travel, just before a carefully crafted narrative rebuild, and right before another strategically managed public return begins taking shape. Suddenly, what looked like nothing more than routine digital housekeeping starts feeling a whole lot more like deliberate positioning. And this is exactly where the royal gossip goes into overdrive, because whispers from palace insiders claim this was never some random update or isolated decision. Instead, they believe it reflects a much bigger internal shift, with King Charles III and Prince William becoming increasingly synchronized instead of divided. What starts emerging is not chaos, but unity. A father and son once rumored to disagree over Prince Harry now appear to be moving together, responding not with emotion but with strategy, not separately but as one. And if that interpretation proves accurate, then changing or removing symbolic royal visibility from official platforms is no longer just administrative. It becomes a clear statement of direction. As everything unfolds, the emotional pressure keeps building around one unavoidable reality. If communication fades, public visibility shrinks, and institutional acknowledgement is redefined, then what remains is more than distance. It becomes a transformation of the relationship itself. As this next wave of revelations unfolds, the story becomes deeply personal. Behind every institutional decision lies a lasting human consequence that cannot be ignored, especially when a father, a son, and grandchildren remain trapped beneath a global spotlight that never truly switches off. What started as a discussion about a website page has now evolved into something far heavier. Insiders describe it as emotional finality wrapped inside administrative silence. Because the real question is no longer what changed online, but what changed behind palace doors. The Sussex listing, once viewed as harmless or respectful continuity, has transformed into the symbol of a far deeper fracture. To some observers, it represented lingering acknowledgement. To others, it reflected unresolved tension disguised as diplomacy. Now, with its quiet alteration, speculation has exploded that the monarchy is no longer interested in preserving symbolic ambiguity. Instead, it appears to be embracing clarity, even if that clarity feels cold and completely irreversible. That is exactly where emotions rise once again. According to royal insiders, King Charles III is no longer acting from sentiment alone. He is operating through structure, responsibility, and the burden of protecting the institution. Meanwhile, Prince William, long viewed as the firm voice behind the scenes, is increasingly seen as part of one united strategy rather than a separate force pushing back. The idea that father and son remain divided is quickly fading, replaced by something far more coordinated, deliberate, and uncompromising than many ever expected. But while palace strategy quietly unfolds, the outside world remains obsessed with titles, branding, and legitimacy. Because in the modern era, royal identity is no longer purely ceremonial. It is commercial, global, and heavily driven by public perception. That is exactly why Meghan Markle's position remains at the center of every conversation. Critics argue that without continued royal association, the entire foundation of post-royal influence begins to shift. And with every institutional adjustment, that foundation becomes more fragile, more questioned, and more vulnerable to public reinterpretation. The timing of everything, especially alongside upcoming travel plans and renewed media attention, has only fueled suspicion that this was never reactive, but carefully strategic. Because throughout royal history, timing has never been neutral. It sends powerful messages without speaking a single word. And when intent is delivered through silence, public interpretation fills every gap with a story often louder than any official statement. Now, growing whispers about the alignment between King Charles III and Prince William are no longer brushed aside as mere speculation. They are increasingly being treated as reality, a shared understanding, a united boundary, and perhaps a final agreement on how to handle ongoing tensions with Prince Harry and Meghan Markle moving forward. Not through confrontation, but through calculated distance. Not through public battles, but through institutional silence that echoes louder than any headline. That is where the emotional weight becomes impossible to ignore. Beneath every strategic decision stands a family under extraordinary pressure. A father facing illness, a son, who has openly shared his side of the story, a brother who has firmly drawn the line, and grandchildren growing up separated from part of their family heritage. These are not imaginary headlines or dramatic storylines. They are genuine fractures inside a family that once stood united before the entire world. Yet according to royal observers, what makes this moment historically significant is not simply the growing distance, but the lasting tone now taking shape. Communication is reportedly kept to a minimum. Meetings are tightly managed, and even when contact is made, conversations appear limited or carefully filtered through official channels instead of personal exchanges. That is where this story becomes far more serious than ordinary gossip, because it stops focusing on what was said publicly and starts exposing what is no longer being said behind closed doors. Silence becomes the strategy, absence becomes the statement, and distance becomes the monarchy's newest language of resolution. Yet the most unsettling chapter may still be ahead. Because if this path continues, the royal family is entering a stage where reconciliation is no longer assumed. Instead, it becomes conditional, procedural, and perhaps increasingly uncommon. That shift alone completely changes how every future meeting, every visit, every photograph, and every carefully chosen public word will be interpreted. Nothing about this story is completely finished. Nothing has been fully closed. But everything is unmistakably transforming. And with every new development, the monarchy is no longer just protecting its image. It is carefully managing separation, legacy,